Good evening, Cassandra.
Hey, Dr. George, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Good, thank you.
So, how are you doing today?
Um, a little bit better. Especially after compared to last week, a little bit better. Not much, but a bit. There is a little bit of light at the tunnel.
Okay. All right. So, you want to go over what happened since we last met?
When we last met, I had recounted what my son said to my sister-in-law's daughter, and as I mentioned to you, the words cut like a knife in my heart. I That's a wound that I did not think I could ever heal from. And I'm still not sure if I can heal from it, but Monsignor Ryan, at his insistence, came over the house on Sunday evening with my sister in law there, and he spoke to me for a while. Basically, what he said to me is, Cassandra, it's a hard blow. He said, and I'm not saying that it's easy, but you have a choice. You could either remain, emotionally comatose for the rest of your life, or you can help others and work through it. He said, I'm not promising you a miracle. I'm not saying that, oh, one day your son will realize and, embrace you with loving arms. That may never happen. But he said, you need to get to a place where you stop disparaging yourself. Yes, you did a horrible thing. And he said, I'm not minimizing what you did. And he said, yeah, I could also understand where your son is coming from. But he said to dwell on that will just leave you in a perpetual comatose state. And that's not what you want. That's not growth.
Okay. So, what do you think about that?
You know something, Dr. George? It would be so easy for me to just crawl in a hole and live there for the rest of my life. Um, I don't think I'll ever get over what happened to my children. Again, my son's words were like a knife in my heart. Yet I found some truth in what Monsignor Ryan stated. There's still something in me that wants to live, that wants to move forward. Inactivity, inactivity will yield no positive result whatsoever. Not for me. Inactivity will just, it will be like repetition over and over and over again, where I'll be reliving my actions, reliving what occurred with my children, and his words, Alex's words.
Yeah.
Are they a knife in my heart? Absolutely.
Yeah. You said a very interesting word. It'd be easy for you to crawl back into the hole.
Hmm.
And when you said that, I thought about the 20 years you spent in prison. In a way, that's kind of a hole, if you can think about that.
It
Or,
it's a
or what do you think?
whole. You know something, Dr. George? It's a whole, and in some ways, strangely enough, it's almost like a cocoon.
Hmm.
Because no matter how horrific your crime is, when you establish yourself in prison, when I say establish yourself, you make friends, you have groups, you have a routine, and despite the horrific nature of your deeds, you're surrounded by others who have had similar experiences. Um, you are not, yes, you are always remembering because you're constantly talking about what occurred, but when you get out into the real world, it's different. There's a level of responsibility that you're accountable for, that you were never accountable for while you were in prison.
So, are there some things of prison that you miss?
One thing that I do miss, and I know it sounds odd, I miss camaraderie with others who had gone through similar experiences. We understood each other, and when one of us grieved, there was always somebody there to talk to. When you're outside, people look at you differently. Like I can go, all right, I could be in prison and I could tell the group, look, I killed my husband. What happened to my children was horrific. It's like a support group, as strange as that sounds. When you're outside, you have to look hard and long for those support groups. You just can't go up to people and say, oh, guess what? I killed my husband. I had such a horrific impact on my children. It's very different. The adjustment is incredibly different.
That's a great insight. I mean, that's something I'm not familiar with, but you certainly are. And that's really a great insight. And you use the word cocoon. So I wonder, is there a way you can get some of that safety, that cocoon type feeling on the outside and still stay out? Because it seems like having that camaraderie and having those relationships are very important for you. Is there a place where you feel in your community where you are right now that could, so
No,
really?
not right now, just Monsignor Ryan and my sister-in-law, but it's different. They've never been there. And yet they're in the position of working towards my mental health. I know that I'm trying to explain. Yes, they've never been in that position, but their stance is, Cassandra, you cannot stay in the cocoon forever. You have to move forward. That's why we're here. It's a different type of growth. Growth is hard. Growth is incredibly difficult. If you want to grow in a full manner, there's so much pain that you have to go through. It's strips of, I mean, there are layers that truly need to be stripped from you. Layers that you may have developed in prison, because again, you're not accountable in prison for your deeds. You're paying for your deeds. Yes, you are paying for them. You are accountable in that way, but everybody knows what you're there for, what you've done. When you're outside, it's a whole different thing. It's like a child learning to walk.
So I wonder, and I know it's challenging, I wonder if there's a place where you can get both worlds. Again, where you can get that camaraderie, that support, people that know your journey, but still be on the outside. Do you think there's any place like that where you are right now?
Monsignor Ryan seems to feel very strongly that I should join the prison ministry in our local Catholic charities.
Hmm.
He's convinced that as I involve myself with that program, I will meet like-minded, when I say like-minded individuals, individuals who are experiencing what I experienced. But he said you can give them so much because you're outside and
Right.
it's realistic. You can tell them, he said, realistically, what the adjustment period has been like. You're
Hmm.
not minimizing it. You're telling them directly, look, this is what you can expect. Don't anticipate coming home to this positively joyous reunion. That may never happen. But you can expect steps A, B, C, and so forth.
I think that's very wise. You know, unfortunately, I did hear a statistic, and may still be true, that some people that have been part of the of being incarcerated for a period of time really miss it, and they tend to do things to get themselves back into that situation. I don't know if you know anybody that would that had done that, but if you met somebody that really said, you know what, they said, I really can't cope out here in the world. I really want to go back in. What kind of advice would you give that person?
If you go back in, you will never know what true freedom is. True
Okay.
freedom hurts. True freedom can definitely hurt. It is not an easy venture. It's very similar to an alcoholic. When an alcoholic stops drinking, I mean, I went to 12-step programs in prison, and people who were alcoholics stated quite realistically, when you stop drinking, that's the hardest period of all because you always have that desire to go back to drinking. Somebody in my position oftentimes has the desire to go back to prison. It's safe there. People know what you're there for. You don't have to pretend.
Yeah. So what would you advise that person that's struggling?
As hard as it is, you need to find someone whom you could speak to quite honestly, quite realistically. Get somebody who's not going to judge you. Ask God. That's really the key, Dr. George. Ask God to lead you to that person. You know, Dr. George, not everybody who's a counselor should be a counselor. What I couldn't stand, and on occasion I would hear that in prison, Oh, I know what you're going through. You don't know what I'm going through. Unless you've been in my situation, you can never, ever, ever know anything that I've gone through. And that's where the camaraderie came in, because all of us knew what we had gone through. There were no surprises there. But when you have somebody, Dr. George, who's sitting behind their desk, who has no idea of the pain of the circumstances that you've experienced, and they come to you in a very impersonal way, and then again with that phrase, I know what you're going through, or I understand. No, you don't. You never have, and you never will.
My hopes are that maybe sometime you can share your experience with other people that may feel isolated. It's almost like doing work with veterans who've been in warfare. I mean, seeing things that none of us have seen. And you're right, there's no way I can understand what that veteran has gone through in the theater of war. But what I've seen that helps veterans are other veterans that are
Exactly.
that are struggling, but there's this brotherhood and this sisterhood they can do
Yes.
together. And it sounds like you're kind of developing that yourself. Is there anything else that, I mean, thank goodness for Monsignor that you're seeing and the other people. Is there anything else that you feel that you can do to nurture yourself, especially when you feel isolated or you feel, that you're going to go back into that cocoon? Are there other things that you can do to care for yourself?
To care for myself, believe it or not, I did get my GED while I was in prison,
Okay.
and Monsignor Ryan is convinced that I should go to college
Hmm.
and become a counselor. He told me by your conviction, you may not be able to obtain certain licenses, but by even with not being able to obtain certain licenses, that would not preclude me, according to him, from serving as a counselor in many programs.
Okay. So let's talk more about that. This is like if I gave you a magic wand, you could wave it over your life, and you're counseling. What would that look like? Who would you be serving? Paint a picture for me.
If I were a counselor, I would be serving abused women. Perhaps not women who killed their husbands, but definitely abused women. It was being an abused child and an abused woman that led me to my actions.
Yeah.
And I would tell the woman, don't do that. It's not worth it. Listen to what I went through. Listen to how I permanently estranged myself from my children, the devastation that my children experienced by my own actions. Don't do it. There are other ways.
I think you'd be very powerful for those ladies, and I hopefully there'll be an opportunity where you can share your story and be a mentor to others. And you're right. There's many ways that you can serve people that haven't have a license. There's so many different creative ways that you can do that.
That's what he had stated, because, he had said to me, Cassandra, you can stay home, you can learn how to knit, you can do all of these things, but despite what you've done, there's a lot in you that God needs to use. And he
Okay.
said how horrific your crime was and what happened to your children, God can still use that.
Okay. So tell me, what are some of those things you feel God could use?
I I became a bit more assertive in prison. As I said, Dr. George, I was not assertive before. Whatever my husband told me to do, I did. I, whatever he asked me, I said yes. And I changed a bit with that in prison. With different groups that I went to, I learned that it was not, I mean, no pun intended, but I learned it was not a crime to refuse certain requests.
Yeah.
Um, and I would tell abused women, you don't have to agree to everything that your husband says. And if this is what's happening, then you need to make a plan and leave. Should I have done that? Yes, absolutely. I would have never, caused that devastation to my children. And yet, selfishly, I think, had I done that, I may not have been in the position to speak with other women. And perhaps all of that was a come around to this.
I believe so. So you mentioned last week you had a very difficult situation when you heard about your son.
Yes.
Any more thoughts about that?
All I can do, Dr. George, is pray. Yes, as I stated to you last week and a few moments ago, his words were like a knife in my heart. Because again, I realize that my killing his father is what led to those experiences, those horrific experiences that he and my daughters endured. And it hurts even more so because even back then, there were other avenues I could have explored. I did not have to kill my husband. I took it out on him, but in essence, I really took it out on my children because I left them alone. I left them orphans. I left them at the mercy of others. And that wasn't a good thing.
You know, part of healing is sometimes taking a look at the truth for what it is and just facing the truth. And it sounds
Yeah.
like that's what you're doing, as painful as that is. As long as it doesn't get you back into a place of despair, but it's important you understand the truth. So how do you see yourself with your kids? If How do you see this thing playing out in time?
In time, if God does answer my prayer, which I hope he does, I would be reconciled to them. I'm not being unrealistic and say that they're going to just embrace me and the four of us will sing kumbaya.
Right.
That I'm not even, I'm much more realistic than that. But I am praying that they will come to a place where they will say, let's listen to what she has to say. She had to have had a reason. She was a good mother before that. Despite her limitations, despite what our father did to her, she tried. Let's listen to her. Let's hear what it is that she has to say.
Mhm.
That's the part that I'm praying for, that I can explain to them exactly what occurred to lead me, to that action, to buying, to getting a gun and killing him.
Yeah. And just remember, it took you 20 years of being incarcerated to really get to this point. So it may take a little time for your kiddos.
It will. It will.
Would you
As,
be okay, would you be okay with that, with the time that it may take?
you know something, Dr. George? Even if I was told you're not going to reconcile with them for another 20 years, that's still hopeful. There's still hope with that. That one day they may wish to hear what it is that I have to say. Look, I will apologize to them. I can't think of any more ways that I can repent except offering my life for them. Um, but again, I want to be in a place where I can explain exactly what transpired and what caused me to go from point A to point B.
Yeah. You mentioned prayers. If I can ask, so what kind of prayers would you offer for your kids? What would be the content of those prayers?
Lord, bring them to a place of understanding that they'll be just even willing to hear me. Just their willingness just to hear me. Again, I'm not going to be unrealistic and think, oh, we're just going to love each other and they're going to take me into their lives. That may never happen. And I know that. But if they'll just hear what I have to say and realize the circumstances that brought me to the status of a self-inflicted widow.
In 12 step, you talk about 12 steps. They have a theme called taking it one day at a time,
Yes,
because they would mention that the addiction being cunning and baffling. It's almost like a monkey on your back. You
yes.
will always struggle with it, so you really can't project too far in the future. The only thing that most people can really do is just take the next step. So you painted a really wonderful picture of hope. I'm so glad to hear that.
Thank you.
Things could happen in a week. Things may happen in 20 years. We don't really know. It's really out of your control. So what are some things, and we kind of talked about this last week, what are some things you can do tomorrow or over the next couple of days that will be beneficial and nurturing for you?
Believe it or not, search out colleges.
Okay, talk
Search
about it.
out, yep, search out. I'm not, I'm not going to go look at a 4-year college right away because
Yeah.
I know my educational limitations, but I did get my GED. And I'm sure that a community college will accept me. And with that, I can be on my way. I think by taking classes, by continuing to meet with you, continuing to meet with Monsignor Ryan, there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Good. I just realized because of your background, because you do have a felony in your background,
Yes,
maybe some places that you cannot serve. So it may require some creativity where you can serve. So just be aware of that. I
yes,
think you have a lot to offer, but there may be some other setbacks and disappointments. But still, I believe you have something to offer to someone that needs to hear your story.
I believe I do. I truly believe I've come to the place where I believe that somebody out there needs to hear what I've gone through. I cannot be the only person who's experienced this. And that's what I love so much about 12-step programs because the people that give the programs, they've been there. They've been there. They're not just coming to you from, from book knowledge. They're coming to you because they've experienced that pain, that addiction, and they're able to minister to you to say, I've gone there. I've experienced that. And this is what you can expect to occur. And that's so realistic. And I need realism right now. Again, I don't need somebody behind a desk who has yet to gone through anything horrific and to try to commiserate with me because I'll just say, forget it, that's not going to work. That's just not going to work. I don't believe anything that you have to say. Stop wasting my time.
I like the idea about you looking out for colleges. That's a really good practical plan. I like to hear your success on that and what's going to go into that choice. So anything else that you can do over the next couple of days that will be nurturing for you, that will move you towards further on your healing path?
I believe what I can do, of course, continue, meeting with you, continue meeting with Monsignor. And when I come to the place of like dejection, when I come to the place where I just want to go back to my cocoon, just realize, Cassandra, God brought you here. As trite as it may sound, you have a purpose. Continue with the college. And I also have to be careful who I speak to. Because let's face it, Dr. George, if I go out on the street and say, hey, guess what? I served 20 years for killing my husband and I'm going to college, there's a lot of people that would look at me and say, you've got to be kidding. You're
Right.
a murderer. You deserve to be in prison for the rest of your life. And why would you think that anything good could ever happen to you? You have to be so careful about the circles that you run in, your associates. And that's something I've also learned. You cannot confide in everybody.